I began to write this essay exploring, how did it come that my sons brought me to sports and not my dad or some other figure? And 550 pages later, I came to what I was doing instead, which was my parents divorced, like probably 56% of you, when I was 10 years old back in 1969. And our family was already poor. My father was making $7,000 a year as a college teacher. $7,000 was more in the 60s than it is now, but not a lot. So now they split up, and now his $7,000 has to support the house we rented and our shitbox car, and now it has to support his new shitbox car and his new apartment. So we went from being poor to poorer, and it began a 10-year odyssey of moving 2 to 3 times a year for cheaper rent and living in some pretty tough neighborhoods in the 70s. And I'm just going to read from a short section of that. So it's a completely accidental memoir. I had no intention of writing it, and I'm a little scared to death that it's coming out. All right, all you need to know is my brother's name is Jeb, my older sister Suzanne, younger sister Nicole. This is set where I grew up in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is a mill town north of Boston. It's 1973, and I'm 14 years old, or maybe at 72 and I'm 13. We live alone with our mother. We smoked every morning at the bus stop. It was on the corner of 7th Ave and Main Street, right next to Pleasant Spa convenience store, a gray vinyl-sided box with dusty plate glass windows advertising Marlboros and Borden's Milk and Ajax. The owner was short and fat, his fingers brown from tobacco, a smoking cigarette forever between them or his lips. He called us punks and fucking assholes. And to the right of his store were wooden steps leading to the apartments above, and that's where 12 or 15 kids waited each morning. Some of them lived down in the avenues, some on the streets across Maine, but we all looked the same. There was Timmy D, a heavy kid with wire-rimmed glasses and thin brown hair. He wore a faded army jacket, the inside pockets usually holding cash and the dope he sold, mainly THC or joints at $1 apiece. And his dingo boots, the square-toed kind with the brass ring cinched in at the ankle, the kind I eventually got my mother to buy me. He carried a pint of Southern Comfort, and he passed it around on the steps to Jerry C., Gary and Ray and Brian, Melanie and Jocelyn, my sister Suzanne, and even me. I took a sip and hated the sweet burn going down my throat. I smoked pot, too, because I didn't have the courage to shake my head at the joint coming my way, because I couldn't say no, couldn't draw attention to myself and maybe get insulted and have to fight. I drew in the smoke like everyone else, held it till my chest hurt, then blew it out, and I hated what happened next. How a part of me slipped inside another part of me to watch me go so dully through the morning. Only a year or so on this side of town, and I begun to look like the rest. My hair was tied back in a ponytail, and every day I wore my one pair of jeans, my dingo boots, a t-shirt, and the brown leather jacket with the zippered sleeves my mother couldn't afford, but ended up buying for me anyway. My body was soft and small, but a man driving down Main Street to work at 7 any weekday morning would see just another delinquent drinking and smoking on the steps of Pleasant Spa, just another kid like Jerry C. in his long hair, black as an Apache's, his sideburns like Greg Allman's, his hard chest from the bench presses he did in his garage, the fact he'd fucked every girl in that neighborhood at least once, including my 14-year-old sister. And then he was off after some other girl, and Suzanne cried for a week in her room, and I despised him, tried not to talk to him or look at him or smile at any of his jokes. But if he passed me a joint or Timmy D's Southern Comfort, I took it and said nothing. This was the early 70s, and later I learned my high schooler of nearly 2,500 students had the 7th worst drug problem in the country. It was a problem for me. I was 13 and constantly stoned and hated it, and was too weak to turn away from it. On weekends at parties down on 7th, or out in a weed lot, or up in the woods of Round Pond, we'd eat tabs of brown mescaline, or a quarter of LSD 25, or half a tab of 4-way purple blotter acid, chemically treated paper you dissolved under the tongue, which tasted like earwax, and the rush came on in 20 or 30 minutes. the feeling the world was a strange and fascinating place, really, a special place, that life was special. Somewhere in that period when I was about a year later, actually it was the brother of Kenny P., who later got stabbed in that apartment they kicked us out of. His brother was a 19 or 20-year-old Army soldier who came home on leave with the express intent of beating up my 13-year-old brother. And this is all in the book, but I have to tell you this because it has to do with writing. So I actually, not only did he beat my brother up in front of me, I pleaded it to him. I begged him not to do anything. He did this, and I cowered like the scared kid I was. And my mother, who was homesick with the flu, she was always gone. She worked in Boston. She was gone 14 hours a day, but she came out swinging a stick. He called her a whore, and I just stood there. So I walked into the house. I walked right into the downstairs bathroom of this rented house my mother couldn't afford, and I actually looked in the mirror at my 14-year-old face, my little whiskerless baby 14-year-old face, and I said to it, "You will never not fight again. I don't care if you get stabbed or shot, beaten to death. You're never going to not fight again. I don't care what happens to you." And that's what that was true. So I began, and not giving too much of the book away, but I began to change my body that day. I began to work out. I began to become obsessive about diet. With 18 months, I transformed my body, and then it began this thing where I would go to bar rooms or neighborhoods or house parties in this town. It was easier to find bad behavior, and I would just wait for somebody to be mean to somebody else. And usually it was someone whacking his girlfriend or pushing a kid down the stairs, and then I just put him in the hospital. I would just wail on him, and I beat up really big guys, and I learned, I learned that, okay, there's the face. I don't care if he's got 260 pounds of muscle. His face has no more muscle on it than mine, and if I hit it as hard as I can before he gets me, he's going down. I was arrested a bunch of times. I was on a very dangerous road. I became just the kind of guy I admired and feared. And ultimately, if I had not found creative writing, if I had not found writing in my early 20s, it's cliche, it sounds like a cliche to say, but I'm convinced I would be in prison for murder or I'd be dead from someone else. And a lot of the guys in the book went actually to prison or they're dead. I thought all my rage was bully boy rage. Oh, that was just 1/10 of my rage. It had to do with the house I lived in. It had to do with the broken family. It had to do with moving 3 times a year. It had to do with so much more than getting beat up. And so I wrote it, and then I read it and said, this is a much more honest book. So I wanted to write about baseball, how my kids taught me sports love, and what it brought me to was the boy in me. And what it brought me to was something I conveniently forgotten, conveniently buried, which is I was a scared, shitless little boy who was absolutely paralyzed with fear and never fought back until I hated myself so much I actually didn't care if I died. And then I became a dangerous kid, the kind of guy that actually people looked up. I actually had a reputation as a badass. What a strange surprise that was, because I really identify with Woody Allen, Anyway, and that's all I want to say. Once again, we were talking about this earlier before the reading tonight. That's what I love about writing. I think that it's smarter than the writer. I think that if you go into it openly and nakedly and without an agenda, it'll take you to places that sometimes you just have to go to.